Welcome back to Reunited States, the podcast where we aim to stitch back our fractured and siloed country through strategic insights and rational discourse. From Manchester, New Hampshire, I am Jesse Saywell.
And from Los Angeles, California, my name is Tyler Ehrig.
And you were just listening to the brand new theme song, co-written by yours truly and arranged by my good friend, Chad Sundman. Thank you to Chad for bringing my silly song to life. You can hear the entirety of the theme, lyrics included, at the end of each episode going forward. I also want to take a moment to announce the launch of our Reunited States Instagram page, where you can keep up with our latest announcements and additional content, and you can contact us. Let us know what you like, what you don't like, what you might want to hear in future episodes throughout the week. So please be sure to follow us at Reunited States Pod on Instagram. Now that we're through the pitches, I want to turn it over to Tyler here to do a recap, as we've had this flurry of Trump appointments that have consumed the news in the last 24 to 48 hours. As we're recording here on Wednesday, a lot of stuff is breaking today about who he is appointing to various positions in the federal government. Tyler, take us away.
President-elect Trump has been really busy the last few days, picking all of his buddies to fill his upcoming cabinet. So let's go over so far everyone that he has nominated to these positions. A majority of these individuals will have to go through Senate confirmation. So far, these are just the nominees by President Trump. So first off, we have Chief of Staff. He has nominated Susie Wiles. Susie Wiles was the political consultant who served as co-chair to Trump's 2024 campaign. She also worked on his 2016 campaign as well as Ronald Reagan's campaign in 1980. So she is 3 for 3 on successful presidential campaigns. I think a pretty decent choice, actually. Think strategically for the seat. Next up, we have Secretary of State, and Marco Rubio has returned. Little Marco is back. But this time, of course, instead of making fun of Trump's penis and calling him a con man who is unfit to serve the highest office of the land, he is serving under him. You will, of course, know him as the U.S. Senator representing Florida, career politician. And next, we have Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth. Pete is a political commentator for Fox News. He is an ex-National Guard officer as well. Not much to go off based off that. Although I didn't really know who this person was. And when I saw his picture come up on my phone with the breaking news, I swear to God, I thought it was Brett Baer for like a split second. And I freaked the hell out.
He's a lunatic. You know, Trump's sitting there, oh, we want to reunite America. Yeah, sure. Take our title here. He says, want to reunite America. If that's what you want to do, it's not off to a great start here with some of these picks. And this guy, Pete Hegseth, is literally, I guess, you know, the qualification you need for the job is that you defend Trump aggressively on Fox News, because that's what he's been doing now for some time. This one was actually disturbing to me, and I think is disturbing to a lot of people. Some of the things that he said about women serving in the military are deeply, deeply disturbing. That we haven't heard the last of this guy, but I suspect that this one's not going to be especially popular, and I am concerned about what that means going forward for the defense of our nation.
Well, that was deeply disturbing, but I don't think it's going to be near as deeply disturbing as his pick for Attorney General. We have the one and only Matt Gaetz, arguably the worst choice on this list, if I ask me. Gaetz is a U.S. representative for Florida, very loud far-right activist. I would argue he's probably the furthest right of all of the current cabinet picks so far. I mean, we could do a whole episode on this guy alone, on all the insane things he's done. But, you know, remember that he was investigated for multiple years for, you know, sex with underage prostitutes. That's a really important thing to remember about him.
Let's remember that he was so upset that former Speaker of the House, Kevin McCarthy, would not break the law and go in and end this ethics investigation into him, this House ethics investigation that is, to my knowledge, is ongoing into Matt Gaetz, that he toppled the Speaker of the House. I mean, Matt Gaetz was the person who led the charge to oust Kevin McCarthy from being Speaker of the House.
Because Gaetz himself was being investigated for having sex with underage prostitutes.
Yes. This guy is an absolute nut job. He is the epitome of the MAGA movement in terms of he's one of just those bros. He's the toxically masculine. We talk about toxic masculinity. Grievance politics, just angry all the time. He's a jerk. He's made a career out of being a jerk. He's never once put forth a bill that actually, like, he doesn't work on bills. He just is a troll. That's what he is. He is a professional troll in Congress, and he has been a Trump loyalist for a long time. This is going to be really ugly if he ends up getting confirmed as Attorney General, because he is going to actively go after a lot of people. The Attorney General, which has historically been considered a position that needed to be apolitical, it needed to not be associated with the White House, that's clearly not going to be the case here. Trump wants somebody to go after his political opponents. He wants somebody to do his bidding, and he wants somebody to protect him when he breaks the law. Matt Gaetz is the worst possible option. I mean, he wasn't even named as like one of the people that they were thinking about until it broke. That's how shocking this is to a lot of us, and deeply disturbing about the coming 4 years.
Yeah, and as AG, we already know he is going to immediately stop the investigation into his own affairs. If you forgot, that was for sex with underage prostitutes. He will stop that.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if that ended up being true, then he would literally get away with it and have one of the most powerful seats in the government. Moving on from there.
Who's next?
We have the Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security, and we have Kristi Noem, Governor of South Dakota, infamously killed her 10-month-old dog because he wasn't a good hunter.
And bragged about it in a book.
Literally, it's all in her autobiography where she was proud that she put down this crappy hunter dog. Yeah, nah, man. Dog killers, they're not on my good list, man.
I have nothing to say about that. This is a terrible choice.
Next up, we have an interesting choice. We have Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard. Tulsi Gabbard was previously the U.S. representative for Hawaii until 2021, and she was a Democrat up to that point as well, up until 2022. She was in the primaries in 2020 that lost to Joe Biden. She switched to independent before switching again to the Republican Party this year, 2024.
Talk about somebody who just got angry at Democrats in Congress and decided to turn their entire allegiance around, change their entire policy positions. She had every right to be angry at the Democratic Party for largely ushering her out of Democratic leadership when she endorsed Bernie Sanders in 2016. But she has since then been taking names and trying to burn down the party as much as possible, and she's just bitter. And again, she had a right to be bitter in the beginning, but the response in turning to becoming like a MAGA person is insane.
Very weird. Definitely loyalty's questionable with her. But next we have the ambassador to the UN, and this is Elise Stefanik, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. She is the current U.S. representative for New York. She is very unashamedly pro-Israel, and I would say, considering the position that she is looking at getting, that's probably not going to be great news for Palestine. Speaking of Israel, and speaking of killing dogs, Mike Huckabee is the ambassador to Israel. He was the governor of Arkansas from 96 to 2007. And I only make the joke about the dog killing because his son allegedly killed the dog, and Huckabee shielded his son from investigation. I remember that was a big story that broke out when he was running for president the first time, I think. He's done it twice now. And I remember hearing that and being like, oh yeah, this guy, no. Dog killing, not on my good list, I'm telling you. And it's weird that it's now associated with two people in the cabinet.
Yeah, I have to say on him, again, with the, ambassador to Israel, this is a person who said that there's no such thing as a Palestinian. That's a direct quote. He said there's no such thing as a Palestinian. So, good job, people who didn't vote for Kamala Harris out of protest. This was a deciding factor in this election. And now we have people who are going to be running the policy regarding Israel in this country, and you wanted to protect Palestinians? These people are going to murder Palestinians.
I mean, you're right. So, moving on, special envoy to the Middle East. This is Steve Witkoff. I knew nothing about this person, and for good reason. He is just a real estate inventor and a landlord. The two things that I guess, makes him Antichrist to all millennials. Famously, he has no experience with the Middle East. Great choice.
I mean, at least it's not Jared Kushner this time.
That is true. That is true, though I don't know if this is better or worse. So next we have the National Security Advisor. This is Mike Waltz. He's another U.S. representative from Florida, previously a colonel with the Army.
Not to be confused with Tim Waltz.
I was going to say, when I saw his name, I blinked and I was like, did you just nominate Tim Waltz? But no, this is Mike. CIA Director. This is John Ratcliffe. Name that might sound familiar to a few of you who are familiar with Trump's first term. He is a U.S. representative for Texas, and he previously was the Director of National Intelligence, a position that is now being taken up by Tulsi Gabbard, for a year under Trump's first presidency. EPA Administrator. This person I also was unfamiliar with. His name is Lee Zeldin, and he was previously a U.S. representative for New York until this most recent election.
Yep, and he ran a very competitive race for governor in New York just 2 years ago.
Next, we have White House Counsel. This is Bill McGinley. He was previously the White House Cabinet Secretary for 2 years within the Trump presidency, and beyond that, he is just a lawyer. Not much to say with him. Next up, very questionable usage of terminology here. We have our border czar, Tom Homan. He actually held this position in Trump's first term for about a year or two, I believe. I find it interesting that on Wikipedia, it's literally listed him as border czar as opposed to Director of U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, which is what it's supposed to be, but it is what it is. He does have a history of working under ICE. He worked under the Obama administration as well. So he does actually have some background in this. We'll see what he does in the new position moving forward. Finally, and man, oh man, do I wish this was a freaking joke. But we have the brand new Department of Government Efficiency, otherwise known as DOGE. In the words of Jeb Bush, please clap. Of course, this is being head by, oh no, not one person. No, it's too important for that. We're getting two people at the head of the DOGE department. This is Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy. I don't think I have to say much about them. Honestly, in the greatest irony of the decade, I'd say, the new department designed to gut government bureaucracy has two people doing the job of one person.
Yeah, I mean, what can you say? I met Vivek Ramaswamy. I watched him debate Ro Khanna roughly a year or so ago, and I have to tell you, eerie. I mean, just a weird, strange feeling being in the same room as the man. In the way that Trump talks about kind of crazy stuff and does it, and you're like, wow, that was not a very eloquent way of saying it. Vivek Ramaswamy is very eloquent in the way that he talks about things like chopping off people's heads and deporting millions of people, etc., etc. He's smooth, and it was striking to see the kind of rock star vibes he had with young conservative men in that crowd. And so, yeah, Vivek Ramaswamy, disturbing. Elon Musk, apparently he has become the first friend of this White House. He's involved in all of these decisions for cabinets. I mean, he has been on the calls, interviewing people. He was on the call with Trump and Zelensky from Ukraine the other day. We said that if Trump won, Elon Musk would be essentially running a shadow government. And that is basically what it seems like we're headed towards.
Not the greatest outlook for that. I think it would be funny if come confirmation, the Senate just says, yeah, no, fuck this Doge thing. So we know that's not going to happen.
That's the thing, is that they don't really... If he creates it, does he have to actually put them through Senate confirmation? I can't imagine that they will actually have to go through Senate confirmation. I don't know, but I struggle to believe that that's going to happen. I just think that they're going to get appointed, or he'll just create it and appoint it in a recess, which he can do, and appoint them as interim and then just leave them there for a long period of time, which is what he's done in the past.
Yeah, well, the Senate isn't giving us much more good news, unfortunately. With the new Senate majority, Republicans have elected a new Senate majority leader. This was previously held by Mitch McConnell, but he has been replaced. In a closed-door vote, the Republican majority has elected Senator John Thune of South Dakota as the new Senate majority leader. This is important. This is really important, and it's important to keep in mind that we start talking about how the Republican-controlled Congress is going to fall behind Trump's agenda. Jesse, you mentioned this 2 weeks ago before the election of what could happen in the worst possible scenario if we get a fully unified Republican government. This is the first step in that scenario. Love him or hate him, McConnell represented the old guard of the Republican Party. He represented what the Republican Party was. That's no longer going to be the case. This guy, John Thune, although he does have a weirdly complicated history, denouncing Trump in the past, is now fully MAGA. On Monday, there was an op-ed with Fox News in which Senator Thune wrote, and I quote, "We cannot afford to take this coalition for granted. If we fail to deliver on President Trump's priorities, we will lose their support. They have trusted us with their votes. Now we have to roll up our sleeves and get to work." End quote. For anyone who went through this election thinking that Trump was not going to be able to accomplish his crazy far-right ideas if he were elected, for anyone that was hoping that they would be able to sleep through the next 4 years and pray for a relatively quiet term, that is not going to be the case. This guy has basically announced that he will be pushing anything that Trump wants. It's basically Trump's Congress at this point, is what Thune is saying. I know we were concerned about it previously, but this is actually starting now. The Republican-controlled Congress and executive branch and judicial branch, they are ready to take action. And that action is literally going to be whatever Trump wants. So Jesse, what does Trump want? What's going to happen? And please tell me you know what we can do.
Yeah, I mean, I wish I could give you the perfect answers here, but there's one thing that I have been warning about since before the election. I mentioned this a couple weeks ago, and I have to come back to it now that we are in the worst case scenario of those three scenarios that I framed, with Republican control and Republicans having control to the point that it's not by just like one vote in the U.S. Senate. They're going to have enough votes to withstand defections from people like Susan Collins or Lisa Murkowski on a lot of these issues. But the biggest concern I have is electoral reform. And electoral reform is the fancy way that the Republicans will brand a bill that will, without a constitutional amendment, essentially make it so Republicans don't lose elections. And that's the thing that I'm most afraid of, and that's the thing we got to fight back most against. Because if we can continue to have fair elections in 2026, I do believe that the Democratic Party can retake the House. And that would seem likely in that scenario because I feel like the Trump administration is going to be immensely unpopular. And so taking back the House would prevent any further kind of major damage on a structural or congressional level. There would be plenty of other damage that would take place. But that's a huge step, and that's what Democrats have to work towards over the next 2 years, is maintaining democracy long enough to take back the House. My concern is that Republicans are going to actively try and make sure that this does not happen. So how would they do that? Well, they would pass an electoral reform bill in the House that would essentially say, if we do not like the results of the election, or if we suspect fraud or suspect some sort of issue with the voting, that state legislatures can overturn said elections and override the winner, basically.
Suspect is the key word there, because they're going to use that to say, like, this is not about cheating or staying in power. This is about protecting against fraud.
Of course.
This is about the sanctity and legitimacy of our elections.
Of course.
This is what they'll say, and this is the argument that they'll use, and obviously this is how they're going to get around doing something that is fundamentally unconstitutional.
Yeah, I mean, you would need a constitutional amendment to change most of these things, but they can do that with a majority in the House, and they could do it with a majority in the Senate if they do what I expect they're going to do, which is they're going to get rid of the filibuster. Trump's going to ask them to get rid of the filibuster, and they're going to do it. Now, historically, the reason why you wouldn't get rid of the filibuster is the fear that when the other side comes to power, then they will be able to use, all the levers of government and bend to their will with a simple majority in the Senate rather than a 60-vote threshold for major bills. The concern, of course, now is that Republicans, if they get rid of the filibuster, can change the laws to make it so they don't have to worry about losing the Senate going forward, because these state legislatures, which are heavily Republican and more conservative than congressional Republicans in the House and Senate, when you get down to these state legislatures, a lot of them are hard right MAGA legislatures. And a lot of them control the state legislatures in significant swing states, like Wisconsin, like Pennsylvania, like Georgia, North Carolina. They control these legislatures. They know that. Republicans know that. If they can pass this law, then they don't have to worry about the sort of backlash that they have had to experience in the past for things like this. So that's my concern, is that they will do that. If that happens, it will be challenged on a constitutional basis. It will be taken up in the court system. It will almost certainly go to the Supreme Court. That's where you start to get nervous. Do you have faith that 5 of these justices, out of the 9 justices, would look at this as unconstitutional? I personally do not. I'm sorry, I don't. Based on what they have said about immunity recently, I just don't see 2 of the 6 conservative justices breaking. I just don't see it. I see 1. I see Roberts would break from this. I believe he would. But the other 5, we're looking at Amy Coney Barrett, Brett Kavanaugh, Neil Gorsuch. Those are the 3 that we would be kind of seeing. Can you sway them? I haven't seen anything that would give evidence to that. So that's the main concern of what would happen. On top of this, what we can predict, especially with Matt Gaetz being Attorney General, the weaponization of the Justice Department is very clear. They're going to go after Trump's political opponents, and it's going to be really ugly. And I'm not saying this because I enjoy it. I'm saying it because you deserve to know what's coming before it happens. You deserve to know how ugly it's going to be. They're going to start with major figures that Trump holds a grudge against. Liz Cheney, Jack Smith of the Special Counsel's Office, Letitia James maybe in New York, Brad Raffensperger in Georgia, Michael Cohen, Joe Biden, Hunter Biden, Kamala Harris, for all we know, Barack Obama. They are going to use the Justice Department to actively try and make these people's lives hell. If nothing else, even if they can't actually convict them, they are going to drag them through the legal process because Trump is angry and he's vindictive. And so that's what we're going to see on a national level. I also believe he's going to go after news organizations. There was a lot of outcry about why the Los Angeles Times and Washington Post did not choose a presidential candidate to endorse. I said this then, and I'll say it now. This was not because they're owned by billionaires. Yes, of course, money is a factor, all of that. But those organizations, contrary to what they may have been telling their readers, they knew what was coming. They knew that Trump was almost certainly going to win the election, and they were afraid of what would happen after the election. And they were trying to do something to basically throw out an olive branch to him so that maybe he wouldn't look for retribution against them, because he has a lot of power to go after news organizations now that he did not have in his first term. That's a scary thing, but I do genuinely believe that these organizations were trying to protect themselves and their employees.
Think about that for a second. News organizations are trying to get in the good favor of the president because if they feel that if they don't, they will be ended. We talked about this last week on the podcast. How far away are we from Russia-style dictatorship? If the news organizations are behaving in that sort of way, where they are legitimately afraid to speak out against a political figure, because if they do that and that person gains power, that they will be silenced.
And we've dealt with it with the Nixon administration during Vietnam. We've dealt with it before with presidents trying to go after the free and independent press. The challenge is that now they have an entire party that seems to be actively trying to pursue it, and the American public doesn't have faith in the media in the way that it did during, like, Watergate. They don't have the faith in it and the will to defend it that they had in previous generations. Yeah, you make a great point. It's scary. It's incredibly scary with Elon Musk behind him as well, and that entire network and the power that he has, not just from a financial perspective, but how much power he has over technology. That also is scary to a lot of people. The next front that we have to talk about, you have to address, is the massive deportations that we're looking at in the next couple of years. Is it possible for Trump to deport 11 million undocumented immigrants in 4 years? No, it is not possible. It is not. And the reason why it's not possible is because the cost of that would be astronomical, and the manpower required to do that, just the logistics of that, would be absolutely astronomical. But is it possible for him to deport 2 million, 3 million, 4 million? Yeah, it's possible. And regardless of whether he reaches those numbers, he's going to be aggressively using every loophole possible and likely passing laws with this conservative Congress to deport significantly larger numbers of people than we have ever seen in our country's history. It will break apart families.
Remember, it's not just undocumented immigrants now. And that's something that makes this a uniquely more dangerous situation compared to his first presidency and really any other presidency we've seen. They are on record, both Trump and Vance are on record, talking about how they want to retract green cards from legal migrants, people who are in this country legally on a temporary migrant status. We're making them undocumented at that point in time, and then, of course, deporting them. Trump wanting to end DACA, which will retract the documented status of, God, no, I don't even want to think about how many children
It's disgusting.
in this country who are here legally.
Children and people who were brought to this country as children and have lived here their entire lives and know nothing but this country.
Who have not committed any crimes, who have not done anything wrong in their whole life.
It's disgusting. This is horrific. The history books are going to look back on the rhetoric from this time and the actions that are going to be taken over the next couple of years. And we are going to, if we have history books, if we can even look back on this, they're going to look at this as one of the great human rights violations of the 21st century. And we have to prepare for the worst. And we feel an obligation to prepare you for the worst. I want to talk about media silos later on, but if you're listening here, you're probably hearing things in a different way than it has been presented to you in a media silo. The reason why is because we are trying to present not a rosy picture, but the actual reality of what's going on in the country and what we might face. So what can you do? That's the next question. What can you do? Both to protect yourselves, to get involved, to help protect others. The first thing that I would encourage you to do, and you've probably heard this from some people, but is get a passport. If you can afford it, and if at all possible, if you do not have a passport, you should get a passport. That's a worst-case scenario preparation, but there's a lot of places that you can, with a U.S. passport, get out of the country to another country and maintain a partial residence for a period of time if you needed to do so. Without one, it could be much more difficult. This is specifically important for our transgender Americans, who are, again, one of the most vulnerable communities now that we're looking at and we're trying to protect. But it is especially important if you are transgender to get a passport now with your gender on it while you can, because we don't know what the process for that is going to look like once Trump becomes president and is inaugurated. Things could move very quickly on that front. So just to check off boxes. We're not telling you that you need to leave. We're not telling you that you need to pack up. That's not what we're saying. What we are saying is you need to be prepared in case the worst comes to pass, which we can no longer tell you is an impossibility. If the worst comes to pass, you have to be prepared. for what you would do. Make some sort of plan for what you would do if the worst thing you can imagine happens. I've had these discussions with my family since the election, and I had, to be honest with you, had planned a lot of this out prior, having seen this coming for some time now. These are the sorts of steps and preparations that you need to be working on. Again, not here to scare you, just here to tell you what you may need to have ready in the worst case scenario. On a slightly lighter note from that, pressure campaigns. The House and Senate majorities for the Republicans are large enough for them to enact a lot of really awful things, but it's not overwhelming. So figure out which House members are in swing districts and pressure the hell out of them at every turn. And when we look at the Senate, take down these names: Republican Senators Susan Collins of Maine, Lisa Murkowski of Alaska, Tom Tillis of North Carolina. Tillis and Collins in particular are going to be up for re-election in 2026, and they are vulnerable senators. So they may be voices that you may be able to reach and sway in some capacity. Murkowski, she voted for impeaching Trump. So if we have fair elections, those candidates, the first two I mentioned, are vulnerable in 2026. They're going to be on speed dial for me. This one's less fun, but self-defense classes. Under no circumstances am I going to encourage violence of any kind. Let's just be clear about that. I am not encouraging you to be violent or aggressive towards anyone in any capacity whatsoever. Full stop. But learning how to defend yourself is incredibly important, again, in the worst case scenario. And so if you are inclined to own a firearm, you need to be taking the necessary instructional courses. You need to have safes. I want to be clear, again, I'm not advocating any form of violence, aggression. I personally hate guns. I have a lot of personal reasons for hating guns, but I've come to the point where I can actively consider gun ownership as a means of protecting myself and my family, which is disturbing. I never thought I'd be at this point. I don't think it will be necessary. But we are in a place where preparing for outbursts of violence is no longer a fringe theory. I do not expect, nor would I ever hope for that to be necessary, and I would say that I think hand-to-hand self-defense classes are a much preferable option and important, especially if you're a member of a marginalized community or a vulnerable community, if you are a woman in this country, because I can't guarantee that the same protections are going to be there with the protections of law that have been there in the past. And that's the sad reality of what we're facing right now. And there are a lot of people who are emboldened right now who would wish you harm. There are a lot of people, not just in the government, but outside the government, who would wish you harm. And I want people to be actively thinking about how they can protect themselves. Not be aggressive, protect themselves.
If you want a slight direction to head in for self-defense, I do highly recommend Krav Maga as a starting point. Krav Maga is an excellent self-defense martial art. It is not very difficult to learn. It's a very, very approachable martial art, and it will teach you not only how to punch and how to kick, but it will also teach you how to disarm people who are attacking you. It will teach you how to disarm people who have a small firearm. It will teach you how to disarm somebody with a knife or a bat or another weapon if you are completely defenseless and only have your hands to defend yourself with. So if you're thinking about self-defense but need a direction, never done this before, I recommend looking up Krav Maga and seeing if there's an opportunity to learn it. Of course, that's not the only thing that can help. Aikido and Judo are great options too, teaching you how to throw opponents, especially those who are bigger than you, if you need to escape from a certain situation. But really anything, any self-defense class, any martial art will be really, really beneficial for anyone. And I would say this too, regardless of the situation that we're in, of course, it's more important now.
Yeah, that's a great point. And that's Krav Maga, K-R-A-V as in victory, MAGA, M-A-G-A. Had to mention that, but might be the only useful thing called MAGA right now is Krav Maga. Another thing that you can do is participate in what is starting to build, which is going to be an underground railroad of sorts for marginalized communities. If you are not marginalized, I encourage you to stay in your community and help lead the change. And if you are privileged enough to be able to move to a blue state or a blue city, you're the type of person that I encourage to actually stay, because it's really important. But if you are truly in danger, it is imperative that we assist the organizations that are already beginning to form to help usher endangered communities to less hostile jurisdictions. It is not possible for everyone to move to a blue area, and that's not what should happen. I keep seeing these memes with the blue states joining Canada, saying problem solved. That is so ignorant, stop it. Millions of people from marginalized and endangered communities live in red states, and many cannot just leave. And I, for one, will not be advocating for abandoning them to the forces of fascism. I'm done with that. So stop posting that meme. That pisses me off. Moving on, sorry.
No, man, preach. That's really important.
Continue to engage. We have said this a billion times, and I'm going to keep doing it. It keeps offending people on the left right now. It continues to piss off certain people, and I understand why. There's an emotional response to this. But continue to engage with people who you don't agree with. Don't disengage. I know this upsets people because they think I'm asking underprivileged or oppressed people to befriend oppressors. And that's not what I'm saying. I'm not asking anyone to put themselves in a situation that is unsafe. I am asking you to not entirely avoid situations that are uncomfortable. And there is a difference between uncomfortable and unsafe. As we've said on this podcast so many times, change comes from personal connections. It does not come from a petition. It certainly does not come from an angry post. It does not come from shutting someone out of your life. It comes from bringing people in. And we as liberals have to start having a bigger tent in which we allow in people who might have slightly different views from us on certain issues. Some people are unreachable. No one is advocating for you to try to be friends with a white supremacist. But please don't put everyone who disagrees with you in a box and close it. We need you to be involved in the discussions, and we do need people from marginalized communities to lead these discussions. Because if there's anything we've learned from the last decade, leaving white liberals to fight these battles on their own often causes more harm than good. So, really quick, I'm going to touch on this more in a later episode, but what can the party do? What can the Democratic Party do? Well, the Democratic Party, if we can protect elections, has a model to follow. And it's not going to be popular with a lot of people on the far left, and I already know that. But we're in a desperate situation right here. And the model is follow the Labour Party. If you don't know what the Labour Party is, it is the leftist party in the United Kingdom, in England, Wales, Scotland, and Northern Ireland. And in an era in which most countries are surging to the right, the UK just overwhelmingly elected their center-left party. And this is after 5 years ago in 2019, right before the pandemic, in which the Labour Party was nearly wiped out, eliminated. They went too far to the left. They nominated a man named Jeremy Corbyn as their leader. Jeremy Corbyn looks like Bernie Sanders, sounds like Bernie Sanders, essentially is the UK version of Bernie Sanders. Turns out he's actually like blatantly anti-Semitic, and we're talking like actual anti-Semitism, and has said some really horrific things and defended some really horrific things. But beyond that, Jeremy Corbyn led the party to an absolute devastation. The party said, okay, we have to look back towards the center. They came back towards the center. They opened up their tent. They stopped pushing people out. They started trying to bring back some of the people that they had lost. And in 5 years, they went from a significant minority party, the worst position that they have ever been in the last almost 100 years, to being a dominant, overwhelming majority within the United Kingdom in the span of 5 years. That's the model to follow. And if we can do that, if we can maintain our elections, and if we can stop with the divisiveness of certain segments of our coalition, if we can stop closing the doors to people, and we can stop having kind of these purity tests of you must agree with us on 100% of all issues all the time, then we have a real chance to be able to get through this and to come out better than where we started. So that's the path that we have, that's the possibility that we have, is following the Labour Party. That's not an easy thing to do. It's not going to be popular among certain factions of the left, but it is the path that we have to take, and you're already hearing it from some members of leadership in the Democratic Party right now.
Excellent point. So with that, why don't we move on to things we can all agree on? And I think both of us are actually going to be maintaining our political stride here. My things we can all agree on is that conspiracy theories are driving us apart. And I mention this now because for the past week, my feed on Instagram, on TikTok, my wife's feed, my friends' feeds, For You pages, all that stuff is filled to the brim with election denialism conspiracy theories about Elon Musk paying for election theft or any of this nonsense. It's everywhere. I don't even interact with those types of posts on stuff like Instagram or TikTok, and yet it still found its way deep into my my algorithm feeds, which is kind of scary because obviously for people who do engage with those things, and I'm not blaming you if you do, but that just means that you're going to be getting a lot more of that than I am. And it was quite literally like half of what I was seeing just scrolling through the app for like a minute. But it's dangerous. It's extremely dangerous. It's toxic, and it's doing no good for us. Listen, I know it's a hard time for a lot of people. It is very difficult, and I am not going to tell you that you should be fine or you shouldn't be concerned, but we cannot slip into the same path that led to the emergence of groups like QAnon on the right. These conspiracies, they don't help. They truly only exist to further divide our country and inject fear and paranoia into our society. It's the Red Scare, like all over again, except this time the Russians don't exist. It's like an idea instead of, the actual Russians. It's not beneficial. It's harmful to your mental health. It's harmful to discussion. It's harmful to politics. It's harmful to society. And we have to reject it. We have to reject it before it solidifies itself as a mainstay within the Liberal Party. Our goal here on the podcast, and what we hope is the goal of everyone right now across the country, is to bring people back together and not to come up with ridiculous, unfounded reasons to push them further away. We talked about irony earlier. The Democrats were so quick to denounce QAnon and conservative conspiracy theorists for the past 4 years. I mean, I've done it. Most of us, you went as far as to ridicule these people on a regular basis, laughing at how insane and ridiculous these theories of election denialism and all these other things were. Now we are looking down the same rabbit hole, but painted differently. And you have a choice to fall down that rabbit hole or to walk around it. Please walk around it. Put away Instagram, put away TikTok. I'm not telling you to delete these things permanently, although that might not be a terrible idea. But
only after you follow Reunited States Pod.
Yeah, that's right. But put it away for a bit. Really, the game is not rigged. And it's not rigged the way these individuals are claiming it is. The system does work, even if it feels like it worked against you. Please do not abandon the system, and I'll tell you why. Because Republicans are not going to abandon the system. And if you do, guess who has control of the system? That's all I got. Jesse?
Preach. I don't even need to say anything. I mean, I couldn't agree more. It ties into my own thing we can all agree on, which is that you need to get out of your media bubble. Part of the reason that these conspiracy theories have popped up in the last week on the left is because people are simply out of touch with the other side of America. Admit it. If you didn't see this coming, there was something you missed. There was something you missed, and it probably relates to where you get your information. And the only thing that I can encourage you to do is to try to break out of your media cycle. That doesn't mean you have to go to watch Fox News. That's not what we're talking about. But just trying to get a sense of where the country is outside of the sources that you see. The people I know who watch on TikTok, like get their news primarily from TikTok, miss a lot of things, and they were very, very taken back by the election results. Same thing with MSNBC. Same thing with Newsmax. We have to actively work to break out of these media silos because you have to understand what is actually going on in the country and where the country is, where the population is. It was very clear that this election was not going to go well for Kamala Harris and Democrats if you were not just looking at the numbers, but looking at the communities that we needed to win over and how happy they were. They were not happy. You have to break out of these media bubbles. You have to avoid, as Tyler said, falling down the conspiracy theory rabbit hole, which the conspiracy theory rabbit hole hit the Republicans. It hit the far-right Republicans, the MAGA people, because they had been told by their media there was no way that he could lose without it being rigged. And that for 4 years now they've heard it, and because he won, we haven't seen any of this whole, rigged election thing, but God, I saw it from people in my hometown posting things where they said, "Dear Lord, I pray that it will be too big to rig." That was the whole thing. Too big to rig, because they genuinely believed that the only way he could lose was if it was a rigged election. Don't be that. We cannot be that. The Democratic Party has to accept that we lost the election. We lost it fairly. And yes, the system is rigged in the Electoral College and all of that, but that would not have made a difference. Trump won the popular vote. What we put forward was not popular. And we have to start meeting people where they are, looking at what they want and what they care about, and crafting policies that reach out to that, rather than trying to do it the other way around. That's all I got for you.
Couldn't agree more with all of that. And I think with that, thank you so much for listening to us. Coming at you from Los Angeles, California, my name is Tyler Ehrig.
And from Manchester, New Hampshire, my name is Jesse Saywell.
And this has been Reunited States. Thank you again to Chad for arranging our awesome theme song that you're going to hear in approximately another few seconds here. Be sure to follow us on Instagram. That is at Reunited States Pod. Have a good night.
When the whole world has got you down and there's no one else around, turn that crown right upside down.